Hey everybody, I'd like to share some ideas in harmony. I know it says lesson in the video title. Believe me, it's just a search term. I'm nobody's teacher, but I would like to thank you for watching all my different videos, and as a way of showing my gratitude, share basically some of the ideas that I use. It's an idea that's been around for a very long time, and you can use it to a moderate degree that will kind of make you sound inside the style in straight ahead jazz and in a kind of a mainstream kind of way. That's what I try to do. But you can also take it to really great extremes and come up with harmonies that you would never have thought of otherwise. So I will jump right in. I should just mention, though, that I will mention these kind of quote unquote rules. We'll call them rules for now. Guidelines, I guess. I'll use the word rule. And lay them all out at the beginning. And I know that they're going to sound confusing if you're not familiar with this, but then I will try to demonstrate these ideas with an actual tune, and hopefully they will make more sense. All right. So here's the basic premise of this idea, which is that if you are performing a piece of music at any spot in the progression, you can, at any spot and for any duration that you'd like, remove the harmony that is supposed to be played there and replace it with a harmony that is the 5 chord or dominant chord of the chord that you're about to go to. So one way to say it is any chord can be preceded by its 5 chord at any spot in a tune or in a chord progression. So there are many offshoots from this basic idea. One of them is that just by the token of adding 5 chords, you can do the opposite and remove 5 chords. If you are looking at a chord progression and it has a 5 chord in it, you can remove it and substitute that by the chord that you're about to go to, that is to say, anticipate it, or extend the chord that you just came through. This is all subject, of course, to this actually sounding good if you're trying it. And I should also mention that the extent that you can do this depends on whether you're reharmonizing a song with a predetermined melody, such as an actual tune, or just an improvised section where you can do more, because the melody may clash with some of the substitutions that you apply. But anyway, so you can remove 5 chords, or you can play 5 chords longer. The next offshoot is that instead of playing the chord that follows the 5 chord, a 5 to a 1, just don't play the 1 at all. Just stay with a 5 chord. The third rule, I guess, is that any 5 chord can be preceded by its 5 chord. So to explain this, look at it this way. When you have applied that first rule and come up with a new chord progression that has new 5 chords in it, that is now your new chord progression. Now you can run this chord progression through that first idea again and add 5 chords based on that first rule. So now 5 chords that you have inserted can themselves be preceded by their 5 chords. As a related idea, the 2 chord is very related to a 5 chord. They're very strongly connected harmonically. So any 5 chord can be preceded by its 2 chord. That is to say, the 2 and the 2-5-1 in the chord progression. So any 5 chord can be preceded by its 2. If you add to the mix the idea of tritone substitutions, things can get quite complicated, because these tritone substitutions, you can apply to them all the rules that have been applied so far. That is to say, those new 5 chords can be preceded by their 5 chords, or by their 2 chords, or be followed by something other than the chord that you were about to go to. The last thing that I would say before actually starting to demonstrate these ideas is that if you manage to internalize all these ideas that I just mentioned, and it's a lifelong process, certainly for me, it's just working on it all the time, you will come to the realization that in a given space of music, it almost doesn't matter what chord progression you're playing if you can decide that you have a target chord that you're about to hit after those chords. For example, we're going to do an example of the first four measures of Taking a Chance on Love. And on beat number 5, on bar number 5, the first beat is an A minor 7. So if I make my focus that A minor 7 on the first beat of measure number 5, anything that has preceded that A minor 7 has to follow it, has to get there logically going backwards from the A minor 7. And by the time you get to the first harmony in the tune, it may be completely unrelated to anything that is written out on a chart. So for example, if on measure number 5, the first beat, you have an A minor 7, you may logically, based on the rules that I have mentioned, decide to precede it by an E7 for 2 beats. That E7 can be preceded by 2 beats of B minor 7 or B7. If it's a B7, that B7 can be substituted for an F7, and that F7 can be preceded by a C minor 7. And by the time you work your way backwards, looking at each chord and trying to see what that chord can be preceded with, by the time you get to the beginning of those 4 measures or your tune or whatever, like I said, that harmony may have nothing at all to do with what's written in the chord sheet. So you can come up with really great, interesting harmonies. And the only difference, I guess, is, or the only question of importance is, if you're harmonizing a melody, like I said, a tune, that it makes sense, and also to not clutter things too much. When I play, for example, I also take into account the melody that I'm playing and keeping a groove. So by the time you balance these things out, you make a decision how your performance affects the listener. If you really want to go out in harmony, you may be sacrificing other elements. But at least as a great exercise, this is something that's worth trying to do. We're going to use Taking a Chance on Love, a classic standard. And the first thing I'm going to do is play it in a kind of a mainstream type way, which is to say that it's not as simplified as it can be, but also doesn't go to great extremes. Kind of a middle of the road, literally, way to play the song. Kind of the way that I would probably play it. So it would sound something like this. Okay, just going to refer to the first 4 bars. And it's interesting to note that a lot of these songs were written, I think, quite a bit simpler than some of these versions that you can see. It's entirely possible, I don't know if this for a fact, but it's possible that when the song was written, it was written like this. Which is to say, just using C and G7. So 1 measure of C major, measure 2 G7, measure 3 G7, and measure 4 C major again. I don't know if that's how it was written or not, but it's possible. And I think that along the way, what happened is that as the tune got published, along the way, jazz musicians would add gradually substitutions until they became more or less the standard. So now let's apply some of the ideas that I mentioned in the first video. First of all, let's try to remove chords. Let's remove the G7 and play the whole thing against C. I think it might sound a little strange at first because the F may be an avoid note against the C, but let's try it anyway. It could work. If it's done with enough conviction, anything can work. Maybe it's something that you want to do maybe only once throughout the tune. It sounds interesting enough. Let's try the other scenario where I don't play the 1 chord at all. I play the whole thing against G7. That sounds pretty good, kind of a pedal tone style. And I played G7 throughout, except for one spot, actually, interestingly enough, instinctively, not even paying attention. Just before the A minor 7, I played an E7 as the 5 going to the 1. What I'm going to do now is play that mainstream version again and explain how that can be explained by the rules that I gave, again, in part 1. Alright, so to start with the C, then this C sharp diminished 7 is really not that at all. It's in fact an A7 with the C sharp in the bass. And why can I play an A7 here? Because it is about to go to a chord that is a fourth up from it, which is that D minor 7, which is the reverse of saying that the D minor 7 is being preceded by its 5. And how come am I playing a D minor 7? Because it is the 2 of the G that will precede the C again. So A minor A7, G7. Okay, let's add one little nice little twist here. What did I do there? I don't know what I did there. I did something that kind of came to me, but I'm sure I can explain it. So up to here, good enough. And then A flat 7. And how come an A flat 7? An A flat 7 is a substitution, tritone substitution to D7. And why can I play a D7 after I play the D minor 7? Because it's about to go to a G7. Except that I didn't go straight to the G7. I went instead to a D flat 7. And I still have some time, so I can squeeze in another D7, G7, C, E7 before that A minor 7. I'll repeat this. Of course, the more chords you add, the fewer beats there are available for each chord. Okay, I'm going to go take this quite a bit further out now and play something perhaps like this. Lots of chords here. Again, the more of them you play, the fewer beats per chord. So C was their first chord. So again, I can't really track what I just did exactly, but I'll try the best as I can. From the C, I went to an F7. Well, how come an F7? An F7 is a tritone substitution for a B7. I know that I'm going to go to the E7 here. So instead of playing a B7, I'm playing an F7. It's in the same. Now the E7 can of course go to the A7, but it can make a little stop on the way. You can play F minor, B flat, 7, the B flat of course being the tritone substitution of E7 to A7. So got to be careful there, because if you have too many chords and you don't have enough beats to reach to get to where you're going, you're going to have to play them really fast to try to catch up. Let's try this again. Another example, the variations are very subtle sometimes, because when you play E7 and B flat 7, it's just the bass that changes, but the 3 and the 7 remain the same. The last variation, which will take this a little bit further out, and will kind of complete the circle in terms of what I mentioned, that by the time that you add up all the chords and go to the first beat, you might not recognize where you came from, is the idea that one thing that was shared throughout all these progressions that I played, that I always started with a chord C. But why do you have to start with a chord C? It says so in the chart, but if my next chord is going to be an F7, let's precede the F7 with something that, like a 5 of the F7. So that could be just a C7, or maybe an F sharp 7 flat 9, and maybe that chord can be preceded by its 5. Maybe this. Something like that. So once again, the idea is that even before the F7 occurs, you try to precede that with its 5 chord, which was the F sharp 7 flat 9, and that can be preceded by something suitable. I did C sharp 7 sharp 11, but you can also do half diminished. All these chords share that melody note, so you just go through as many chords as you want, as long as they resolve logically and comply with the melody note. So